All right, so today we're going to look at fluency as the and very important aspect of assessment. One of the things I want to make clear from the beginning, though, is that fluency is often misinterpreted. I think it's something that is really, really important to reading, but I think often when schools put in fluency goals and a focus on fluency, they tend to look at it as like the end goal, but it's really not. Fluency is a means to an end, and we're gonna this whole lecture is gonna be looking at fluency with that eye. So today we're going to look at fluency and its dimensions. We're going to explore the limitations of informal assessment, such as DIBELS, and we're going to model some strong literacy practices in the classroom that focus in on fluency in particular. So the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of fluency has its roots in our history of oral reading. And this is a quote from McGuffey. You've probably heard of the McGuffey Reader, right? This was, the 19th century. Really, a lot of our public schooling through into the 20th century. But one of the things that we need to remember is one of the reasons why oral reading was so important was because books were expensive, and so we needed to be able to preserve books and keep using them. So families practiced oral reading. Particularly, it started, culturally as the Bible, and then in early public schools, reading instruction really largely was about oral reading and memorization. By the middle of the 19th century, reading textbooks, or the textbooks that, for teacher colleges, talked about oral reading instruction as being the dominant instruction. Decoding, recitation, and elocution or performance were the main concerns of reading instruction. In the 20th century, educational psychologists began to look at oral reading, and they began to look at reading in particular, and they took a close look, doing things like tracking eye movement and asking cognitive questions. What are people thinking? And what they began to come to sort of believe was that silent reading was superior, because it would prepare students for the kind of reading that they might do in life. So oral reading was looked at as being very passive. The student really wasn't there wasn't a lot, they weren't asked to comprehend what was make meaning out of what they were reading. And so what happened then is in the 20th century we began to focus from oral reading to silent reading. And we had testing now that was going to require silent reading. However, we started to recognize that there's components of oral reading that were quite useful and that remained in schools as we tried to look at how to get our students prepared for the silent reading that was being asked for them. So really, oral reading and our grandfather and now today's idea of fluency, we really want to look at it as in terms of a bridge. It's really about getting our students ready to move from decoding to comprehending, and it's that bridge that gets us there. Fluency, as a definition, is the rate. Fluency is rate with correct intonation, okay? So one of the things in schools, a lot of emphasis on rate, words correct per minute. But there's also another component that we want to consider as prosody, which is reading with expression, okay? So I'm going to show you just a little bit of a DIBELS, a video of a teacher giving a DIBELS test, which is the fluency test that is often used in schools.
Hi, I'm Shayna. Today I'm going to be showing a DIBELS assessment that we use in 1st grade through 4th grade.
In case you didn't know, DIBELS is Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. So this is a test, and you're going to see it's very similar to the IRI. There's just not as much focus on the miscue analysis.
The first story that you're going to read for me is called The Jump Rope Contest.
And notice she'll
It was the day of the jump rope
time
contest. Kim and Anna were going to compete. Kim was going to do a new trick. Anna was going to help.
It's words correct per minute, so she's going to be marking any incorrect.
The two girls watched as younger children took a turn in the contest. The young children jumped and skipped rope in a circle. They were just beginning to learn fancy tricks. 5 boys went next. They used ropes to do tricks. All the boys jumped over ropes at the same time. Their feet moved quickly and in a steady beat. The boys did tricks, kicks, and spins. The ropes never stopped turning. "We're next," said Anna. Kim hoped she would not miss her new trick. Anna was sure that she and Kim would do well. First, Kim turned the rope. Anna jumped. Anna did some spins.
Stop it.
Okay, so in this test, the goal of this test is not so much to figure out his reading level, his instructional level. The goal of this test then is to figure out his fluency rate. Okay, and so fluency, most schools will benchmark. They'll have benchmark scores. That'll be given in the fall, and then those benchmark scores will help them to determine where they want them to be for winter and summer. Okay, and obviously we don't want, you can see the gap gets wider and wider for the 10th percentile compared to the 90th percentile when we look at 1st through 6th grade. So we also want to be working on our students. This is going to represent a year's growth. Any student that is below the 75th percentile, we probably want to also work on getting beyond that 1 year's growth and hopefully starting to move that gap so that they don't get left behind as they age in the program. So one of the big questions is how effective is fluency as a measure of reading skill. And I will tell you that I was one of my very first studies that I was involved in as a doc student. We actually looked at reading fluency and college readiness skills. We looked at incoming freshmen, and we used the ACT to gauge their reading skill, their ACT scores, and then we had them come in, and we had like hundreds of college freshmen from Kent State University came in, and they just did a simple Dibbles test, and we found huge correlations, significant correlations between students who were able to read quickly and accurately with correct intonation with students who scored well in the ACT versus those that indicated that they're going to need some kind of remediation. So what it tells us is that really it is an accurate indicator of how students are going to perform on high-stake tests. So if those high-stakes tests are in fact indicators of our abilities, then we'll see some strong correlation. Obviously, it's really, you can make some questions about the tests themselves, but I think the takeaway is that yes, and it makes sense because if we think of fluency, like all of us have only so much cognitive load that we can take at any time. If our students are spending more of that cognitive load trying to decode something, there's not as much left for them to make meaning out of, for them to comprehend the test, right? So we want to, as much as we can, make reading effortless, the decoding part effortless, so that their cognitive load can go into comprehending. And hopefully that's what we see happening as they get older in the program. We see reading become more and more effortless. The other part of fluency that often is overlooked when schools talk about their fluency goals is prosody. This is a joke. It made me think of my father-in-law because he used to always send us tons of, he used to very much use his exclamation points, and I used to tease my husband, like, does your dad know that he was yelling at us throughout his whole email? But it's this idea that prosody is that it matters that the way something is conveyed it matters based on like things like pacing, emphasis, tone, and expression also matter. We could have something that's read with two different expressions and suddenly it feels like it's got two completely different meanings. So prosody, and this is an example of a fluency rubric that you might use that really looks at prosody, where you can see pace, the words correct per minute. That is something that we factor in, but we also want to look at expression, phrasing, smoothness, and pace in more qualitative versus quantitative sort of measurement there. So why do we work on, what do we have come to learn about the benefits of oral reading or specific work on fluency? First one is that it engages students in reading. If reading isn't something that happens effortlessly, it's going to take some motivation to get students into it. So it motivates reading and engages them. It allows struggling readers to witness good reading, and that's why it's really powerful when you can have them be seeing those witnesses from peers as well. It exposes students to many genres. It's very, very common for poetry to be used in fluency work, so it's a great way to introduce them to poems. And it helps students explore sophisticated words and text structures. It gives them a sort of a low-risk way to kind of attack these stretch texts and these stretch words. So what does fluency look like? So I just wanted to show you a couple of videos of some fluency work happening in classrooms.
This is an antiphonal choral reading, which means that there are two groups that are answering back and forth to each other. The name of it is Symbiosis and Competition, which seems like an odd name for a reader's theater type production, but my kids were reading in a boring science text one day, and they rewrote the words to make it come alive about what a food chain is. So here is the class that is performing Symbiosis and Competition.
We are living organisms. We are the food chain. We are symbiotic. We are competitive. We are into long-term relationships because we...
Notice how she taught them to look at their tone as well, and how much more aggressive the competitive...
We need one another. We are into contests because resources are limited.
Okay. So that video shows you that something like fluency work could also happen in a science lesson, okay? Here's another example of a choral reading. Let me pull forward a little bit. I thought I asked to start at 54, but okay. Let's see here.
Choral read. That means we all read together. Okay? All right. Finger on the first word.
So
Now I want to make sure I hear your voice. We're going to go nice and slow so we can all say it together. Ready? Here we go. I don't like to forget my dreams. You know how sometimes you wake up and you...
Okay, so that's choral reading. So these are two examples of different ways to do choral reading. The first one was to do it as a kind of a call and response, almost like a reader's theater. This one is looking at it as a small group instruction. Here's another example. This is good fluency work, even though we don't necessarily think of it as fluency work.
This is a book called In the Year of the Boar and Jackie Robinson. And as I read this book, I'm seeing in awe. I think it's because you recognize the name Jackie Robinson. Did you recognize it? How many of you recognize Jackie Robinson, the name? Good. And that has something to do with the sport of baseball. Good. That has something to do with baseball. So we're going to see what connection in the Year of the Boar and Jackie Robinson, how those two things, we're going to be waiting for quite a while in the book to see how they come together and how they relate to each other. But it should start kind of the ideas rolling in your head of how you're going to...
So reading there, oral reading, which is something that we do, that is another way to engage your students. Here's another thing that maybe with older students you might want to consider is doing some...
Our first poet is 1998 Slam champion. Please give it up for Steve Coleman.
I want to hear a poem. I want to learn something I didn't know. I want to say yes at the end because I'm sick of saying so. I want to hear a poem about who you...
So having students write or perform poems using beat poetry might be a way to add some fluency work. Here is a class that's going to work on accuracy and phrasing together.
In this clip, Marissa Russo conducts a fluency lesson in which students focus on accuracy and phrasing. Ms. Russo provides a guided release model in which she scaffolds learning by first modeling for students how to read the selection with accuracy and phrasing, then asks students to echo read following her lead, and finally has them partner read with peers.
So that's what we're going to work on, reading with accuracy and proper phrasing when there are words that are multisyllabic. Does that sound okay with you?
Yes.
We're going to remember reading about Ellen Ochoa?
Yeah.
You're familiar with Ellen Ochoa. I brought some photos of her. Say Ochoa.
Ochoa.
Awesome. Are you ready to read?
Yes.
Okay, well, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to model it first because I want you to hear me read. And then you guys get to echo read with me. What is echo?
You read
Somebody raise your hand. Yes.
You read first and then we read.
Yes, I read one sentence.
You read another.
I read a sentence and you read the
Same sentence.
Excellent. Okay, you guys ready? But let me do it first though. Let me do this with the proper phrasing and the proper accuracy. Okay, everybody? Here we go. You can just look at your paper or watch Miss Russo up here. Here we go. Later, Ochoa was a mission specialist, again on a space flight in 1999. During this flight, she and the crew delivered supplies to the International.
So she's going to have them then. So she's going to read the passage and then she has them.
On a space flight in 1999. One more time. Listen to me first, and then everybody together. Later, Ochoa was a mission specialist, again on a space flight in 1999. Begin.
Later, Ochoa was a mission specialist again on a space.
Okay, so then what she does is the last part she has them work with partners. And
She also walked in space.
Oops. And then
Outstanding. Are you guys ready to work in pairs?
So then they work
Get
in
to
pairs.
your partner that we selected before.
Flies to the International Space Station.
So this is something. These are just different ways that you could work on fluency. The work on fluency is really fun. There's just so many fun things that you can do. So you can do the paired buddy readings. You could do radio reading or podcasting. I mean, you literally could have the kids do podcasting. There's so many great technology tools out there that they could be creating. I saw over the summer, a classroom where the second and third graders were creating a oral library for the first graders or for the kindergartners, and they were reading. They were using GarageBand. They were reading and they were showing the book, and the kids you could use simple screencasting, but they were creating. And part of the centers for the kindergartners was listening to and reading along with the older students with the book. So great opportunities for you to do things that involve having the students hear themselves. You can have them do listening centers or books on tape. I know that's old-fashioned, but you know what I mean, having them set up there. You can have them do dramatic readings where you have them act out the Three Little Piggies, so like, how does a wolf sound? Those types of things. And then you can have them turn, so this is something that you could use that could also be working on their writing skills, which is maybe make a play adaptation to a story that you read and then perform that play adaptation. So there are some formal programs that some of you may have encountered in schools, and there's fluency-oriented reading instruction, which is a weekly curricular approach, where there's scaffolded instruction. The teacher reads a story, the students echo the story, they read it in choral, they do paired reading, and then there's extension. And so they work with the same story for an entire week. And then there's also a second, so some schools are going to choose to do the fluency-oriented reading instruction, FORI. That's something that you'll see, especially with in the younger grades. But there's also some schools that choose just to do the fluency development lessons, which is a single lesson routine. Similar idea, but you just use it as maybe you get to a stretch text or as needed, where the teacher reads a passage, rereads the passage using different types of expression, and then there's a choral reading of the poem, paired reading, and student performance. So these are two more structured approaches. There's steps to both of these. One is much more of a weekly curricular, and one is more of a single lesson routine. But both of them develop your students' awareness and understanding of fluency. One of the things that I think is really kind of important to note about fluency is it prepares students for deep reading versus wide reading. If we looked at fluency just as reading as quickly as possible, then we would be preparing them for wide reading. They could read a lot of stuff. But deep reading is really the kind of reading that we want our students to get to, right? When we think about when we think about the literature that we are having them read in high school, or that they might read in college, or even the content area reading that they need to do, it's often more about being able to make meaning, being able to interpret, being able to connect to the reading. And so fluency work gets our students ready for this kind of deep reading, because deep reading can often involve reading something multiple times and for multiple purposes. And so this is something that kind of prepares our students for, we don't just read something, set it aside, and be done with it. There are times when we go back into a text multiple times. So one of the things, I want to combine these two modules together. We did the thing on the IRI, and we did now looking at fluency testing. Quick reading probes may tell us a lot about student learning. Most important for us to remember that reading is a complex process, so no one probe is going to get us where we want to be. But we need to do assessments, because how can we address those things that we cannot see? And so this allows us opportunities to see some, snapshot into our students' reading. Okay, so don't forget the important role of formative assessments. We want to treat these things as formative assessments. We want our students to be seeing this. We want them to use maybe a Dibbles test or an IRI as feedback for themselves. We also want to be looking, it's helping us to make our instructional decisions and choices as a teacher. So we want to go back to that idea of formative assessments. All right, thank you very much, and hope you have a good rest of the week.